Now it is my privilege to introduce our moderator today, Professor Carter Doyle. Professor Doyle is the Blue Ridge Distinguished Teaching Fellow at UVA. He also worked as the head economist for a Los Angeles-based multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. Professor Doyle received his PhD in Econ from Florida State University, a master's in 2005, and a BS in Econ and Math in 1998. Prior to joining the faculty at Virginia, Doyle taught at Florida State University, Florida A&M, Georgia Institute of Technology, and Georgia State. We hope you will all enjoy this panel. And students, if you can, please turn on your camera. I will now hand it over to our moderator, Professor Doyle. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and thank you for all your hard work organizing this panel. Shout out to Jen Jones and the great job that she does running our Eco Career Center. Since I've been here over the last several years, it's kind of coincided with her being here at UVA, and she's been a real asset to econ students, in pursuing careers. And I just want to thank her for that. And thanks also to the Econ Career Center Student Advisory Board steering committee who put all this together. I really appreciate that. So welcome everyone to this undergrad career forum. COVID is happening, but we're pushing ahead doing this virtual, so everyone benefits from it. I really want to thank Andrew, Annaliesa, and BJ, our alums here, for taking time out of their day to give back to the university and give back to you and impart some important career wisdom. So despite this labor market that we've been in, the effects of COVID, this recession, our graduates continue to do well. They've taken jobs in a broad array of industries, from banking, finance, consulting, IT, government, nonprofit, etc. And at some big name companies such as Amazon, Bain, Google, the Federal Reserve, Oracle, the State Department. And a large part of that is from the work of the Econ Career Center. We're really putting something together here special for our department. And so for those considering a major, and I'm sure there's some on the line here with us, Econ really teaches critical thinking skills, data analytics, communication skills, all valuable things that employers are looking for. So just let's get a sense of who's in the room. If you can, in the chat, state your year and what your major is. And of course, if you're first or second year, you can say undeclared. But if you're third or fourth year, please state your major in the chat so we can get a sense of who's in the room. So I'll start off with our panel that we have here. And just to get a sense of, and I'll go in alphabetical order for lack of a better way to organize it. So Andrew, and then Annaliesa, and then BJ. Tell us briefly a little bit about your career path from graduating from UVA, taking various jobs, but primarily focusing on your current position, your title, what it's like to do your job, and a little bit about your organization, if you will. And we'll start with Andrew.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Thanks, Carter. And I did the alphabetical math in my head ahead of time for both first and last name, and I was on the hook here as first anyway. So my path was, I was a 2001 econ major at UVA, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and that was part of why I chose economics as a major, and that was in part what Carter was talking about in terms of it teaches you a lot of good frameworks and thinking. And some people, it's my experience in their 20s, think they know what they want to do, but in my experience, most people don't really know, or it takes a while. It's a journey, to figure out what energizes you. So the more that these kind of broad frameworks and ways of thinking that equip yourself that are useful across many disciplines, the better. So that was some of the advice I got. So that was part of the reason I was an econ major. And then after UVA, I went into sales because I'm an introvert. And I got some advice from some coaches and professors even that said, sales is a key thing you got to learn, and you can't learn it from a book. You just got to get out there and get yourself beat up. And I did it, and I was terrible. I was so bad. But I got fired from my first job. And then I found my second job. Actually, I had a very good manager and was still in sales and business. And he coached me along the way. And I got better and better, and it was great. And I started doing really well. I found my way to sell, and it's just a really useful tool because no matter what you're doing, you're always selling yourself in some form or fashion, or you're selling a product. And so great skills. Ironically, though, as I got good at selling and was in the top 10% of the sales folks, I started getting bored at the same time when I was making more money and being successful. So I went back to business school, actually at Darden at UVA, and from there had a couple of great years. I highly recommend that program as well. And then I went into investment banking for a few years and loved that. It was fascinating. Really enjoyed the work. Did it for, can't remember, 4 or 5 years, and decided it wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So at that time I had a young child, and I was married, and we decided we wanted to make a geographic move for our next stage. So we moved to Maine, and we love it up here for a number of reasons. And it's different finding a job in Maine than it is in like New York or DC, what I was more used to. And but I ended up joining LL Bean, and it was because of the UVA network that I got the introduction to that. So that was super helpful. And the woman I met with, or I first contacted, she was in finance, and I was in investment banking, so I was in finance at the time. So I joined as an analyst at UVA at LL Bean, and hopefully all of you know LL Bean. It's a big retailer, sell like outdoor gear and clothing and all kinds of fun stuff to get you outside. And yeah, that was 10 years ago now. And I worked my way up. I started as a lead analyst, they called it, and then got promoted to a manager. And then this position opened up in the international division, which was great. So I got to step out of finance and do some more general management. And then they asked me to come back to finance, and the VP of Finance and Strategic Planning. And that was kind of my journey. Carter, did you want me to tell you just briefly what I'm doing there, or expand on my title, or is that enough for now?
Yeah, if you would like, just very briefly, because I think it's very, very interesting. Students would want to hear it.
Yeah, sure. So finance and VP of Finance and Strategic Planning. So it's pretty much all of finance with the exception of accounting. So accounting, a good way to think about it is backwards looking financial work. So they look at what happened in the past, counting all the pennies, make sure everything worked out, make sure we've accounted for everything properly. In my role, what we look at in our group is everything forward looking, and that starts way up in the strategic planning, like 5-10 years looking out. And then like what's the big forces at play in the sector, and where should we be putting our bets, our investments. And then from there you build a little closer in term and near term rather, and you're doing a 3 to 5 year financial plan. And a financial plan is a great container to hold all the decisions of the business and say, do these decisions add up to make something that's good results? And so that's the long range financial plan. And then we do annual budgets. And then in season, like in the actual, within year, we take a look at how's the business doing, what forces are at play. And as you can imagine, this past year was a very, very fun one from that standpoint. And like in March, it's like, oh my God, what's happening? We canceled $80 million of inventory buys. And then shortly thereafter, we actually ended up having a terrific year. But shortly thereafter, it was like, oh my gosh, people are buying all kinds of stuff. It wasn't what we originally had. So we swapped out chino pants for slippers and, that kind of a thing. So it was just really fun managing in season and pulling those levers. So that's kind of like to the more near term side of what we do. And then the last piece is the analysis. So any kind of a project, whether it be, do we open a new store? Do we want to make an acquisition? Do we want to invest in a new piece of equipment in the fulfillment center? All those types of things. You have to do a financial analysis and say, is it a good investment? A, is it worth the company's and management's time? B, and we pull that all together and have discussions with the executive team and the board, and decisions are made. So that's kind of what we do. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. And I really like that advice. I think very helpful for students to hear about stepping out of your comfort zone as an introvert and going into sales. I think that's fascinating. Annaliesa.
Great, happy to be here. Another New Englander. I'm up in Boston, and I would not survive without my bean boots. So thank you, Andrew. So I graduated from Virginia in 2015. I was a history and econ major. After school, I joined a consulting firm called McKinsey, and I worked in New York. I definitely didn't know what I wanted to do kind of coming into school. I was a history major at first at Virginia, and sort of found econ along the way after taking Elzinga's class and just fell in love with it, so did both majors. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer for a little while in school, mostly due to the history major, and I worked at a couple law firms, and every lawyer told me how much they hated being a lawyer, so I thought maybe I'll look at something else. But being a lawyer is great if that's something you want to do. So I ended up joining a consulting firm after school. I thought it was a really great sort of early career education step. You get a really broad sense of just how businesses think strategically. Big firms like McKinsey, BCG, like they work on any type of project under the sun. So it's a great training ground to get a really diverse experience, but also have the chance to hone in on things that really excite you. And when I was at McKinsey, I found that I really liked transaction-oriented work. And I ended up, after 2 years at McKinsey, joining a private equity firm up in Boston that works on buyouts. I didn't know what private equity was when I was in undergrad, so you guys are probably way more savvy than I was, but just to explain what that is, essentially, if you're an investor, like you as an individual could buy a stock of a public equity, you could buy a share of Apple or GameStop, and as the company grows in value or doesn't, you share in that upside or downside. Private equity is similar, but with private companies. So, you know, an individual, a firm, or a group of individuals will invest in a private company, help it grow, help it improve, and then sell it. And that's how they make money. So that's what I did after school for 2 years in Boston. And then I have briefly done part of my MBA, took a break due to COVID, and I'm back in the industry in growth equity. Similar to private equity, but it's a little bit earlier stage companies, faster growth, but the same sort of motion, and that you're looking for interesting companies to invest in. You become a part owner, you help them grow, and then you sell your stake. So that's been my path. I'm a what's called a vice president level at my private equity firm up in Boston, and we invest in software and technology companies. So happy to answer any questions about investing and private equity and all that.
Thank you so much, Annaliesa. I'm not from New England, but I've been a lifelong Red Sox fan, even before they were winning World Series.
Can't wait to go back to a game.
Yeah, that's right. BJ, please.
Thanks, Carter. Nice to meet everyone. My name is BJ Vargas, and I graduated from UVA in 1999, so I think I'm the elder statesman on the panel. I've spent my entire career working in finance and really at 3 large investment banks. You know, I guess I can weave in my story a little bit to what Andrew and Annaliesa talked about. So I very much knew that I wanted to go into finance and specifically investment banking from a young age. And it was mostly because I was failing biology in high school. I wanted to be a doctor. And I realized that probably was not going to happen if I couldn't figure out the science aspect of it. So I devised a plan that I was good at numbers, I was good with people, and I thought that working in finance, specifically in investment banking, was a career path that would work well with my skill set and what I enjoyed doing. And so I sort of set out on that path from an early stage at UVA. And the first thing that people typically ask me is, if I knew that was the path I was going to go on, why didn't I go to McIntyre? And it's a pretty simple answer. For me, being an economics major gave me a really strong foundation, I think, but it also allowed me the flexibility to pursue some other interests that I had while I was at UVA. I got a minor in international affairs. I took some MFA classes while I was at UVA, Masters in Fine Arts classes. So it was sort of the best of both the worlds for me. And when I look around at the business that I'm in today, you know, it really draws from a very wide range of majors. And so there's, you know, I think there's typically a slight stigma that if you haven't been in a business school at a specific college or university, that you cannot get a job working in finance more broadly. And I would really disagree with that. I think certainly today more than ever, the diversity of thinking that we're looking for, in the business is wide. And I think whether you have an economics degree, which, obviously I'm very partial to, or a number of other degrees, I think you can find ways to make it applicable to the role that you have. So I'm a managing director at JP Morgan. I have 3 primary jobs. I run the international equity sales business in North America. What that means is I have responsibility for distributing JP Morgan's non-US equity product into North American-based institutional clients. When I say institutional clients, the types of clients that we deal with are both mutual fund, long-only managers and long-short hedge fund managers. I'm sure you've read probably about both types of clients in the papers, et cetera. My second job is I run our US equity business in New York, and that's our largest single equity sales business globally. And then my third job is I have responsibility for our investor access business in North America, which is the business that brings both corporate meetings and analyst meetings and expert meetings to our clients. I have a couple of other responsibilities at the firm. I lead our technology initiative for the equities franchise, which is involved in the last 3 years, really, a tremendous amount of work building out our machine learning and AI capabilities. It's been a really fun part of my job. I couldn't really put my Apple TV together probably 5 years ago, and I've all of a sudden found myself front and center with a number of really interesting technology initiatives, and so I've greatly enjoyed that. And then the last thing that I spend a lot of my time on is I'm co-chairman of the firm's Hispanic Executive Forum, which is our cross-line of business senior Hispanic leadership group. I'm deeply involved in JP Morgan's diversity efforts. I founded both the Hispanic Executive Forum, which, as I said, is across JP Morgan, and the Hispanic Leadership Forum, which is specifically in our investment bank. And in the 22 years that I've been working in this business, it's something that I've championed for a very long time. So I'm happy to speak about any of the aforementioned.
Thank you so much, BJ, and thank you for all the work you're doing in that area. To play a little bit off of what BJ was talking about, the econ majors. So many of the students here, I imagine, are econ majors. Let's go through the panel again and kind of hear how the econ major at UVA has kind of helped you in your career, because many students are taking these classes and they're not sure how they're helpful or not helpful. And so how has the econ major helped you in your career? Is an advanced degree necessary to advance in your area as well?
Yeah. So in terms of how it helped me, I talked about this a little bit, but the frameworks and the ways of thinking, and there's this term called isomorphism, which I don't know if you guys heard of that, but it's taking one concept and applying it to another completely different field. So it's like a doctor with some insight into biology all of a sudden says, oh, this is really similar to this problem we've got in manufacturing, peanuts. And then you're able to cross-pollinate that knowledge and or the framework or the way of thinking, that kind of thing. And that, for me, has been that notion has been one of the most valuable themes in terms I've used in terms of solving problems in my current job as well as in past ones. So I like to focus on these global realities global truths about reality that you can apply. And again, like the econ, just simple stuff like, I don't know, marginal return on investment, or like supply and demand. They're so basic, but if you really, really spend time and understand all the ramifications and can apply those to different applications, I found it to be invaluable. So I would just say take as much as you can, like game theory. I don't know if that's still a course like that is used all over the place. And something as seemingly like academic as Prisoner's Dilemma actually comes up all the time in the real world, if you can see it, if you can spot it. So that's where that I think is helpful. And then I think your second question around the What's the second question?
Is it graduate degree necessary?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say so. No, it's definitely not required. It can be a very fast way to pivot careers for sure. Because like I was in sales and I felt like I wanted to get more into finance. So it's super helpful in that regard. And then it does make it easier to get conversations with recruiters if you're going somewhere you don't know. But networking is still super, super helpful. But yeah, it's not necessary. And I guess I'd say that's more on a case-by-case basis, and what you're trying to solve for is whether or not the graduate degrees are needed. But that kind of answer your questions, Carter?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Annaliesa?
So I would say I when I was at Virginia, I never really considered doing sort of McIntyre business-oriented path versus econ, but sort of putting myself back in those shoes, if I had thought about that choice, I loved the sort of intellectual nature of the econ degree. I think it's pretty academic, a lot of the courses, and I sort of loved diving into the theory, and like I'm a nerd and I found that stuff really interesting. I sort of rounded out my Virginia experience by taking accounting as a fourth year, so I felt very old. But I was kind of glad that I ended up supplementing sort of the academic intellectual piece of the econ degree, which I loved, with like maybe a little bit more practical business knowledge, like accounting in the end. But I don't think that's necessary for pursuing a career in finance. A lot of that stuff you can learn on the job, and that sort of thing. It's actually a lot easier to learn on the job than taking the time with some great professors at a university to like dive into the more academic theory stuff that you're just not gonna feel like you have time maybe when you're in the working world to spend time on and challenge yourself in that way. So that was some of the value I got out of the econ degree. I would say in retrospect, again, I wish I'd focused a little bit more on sort of data literacy and just familiarity with how to analyze and think about data. It's something that has become very important in my job, and that you just kind of learn as you go, but it would have been great to have a bit of a foundation of that and some of the tools that I would come across later on in school. And in terms of a graduate degree, I am midway through pursuing an MBA. I, again, did not think about it in undergrad, and I don't think you need to. It sort of comes up in the career path that you end up pursuing, whether or not it feels like the right move. And it ends up being very personal in terms of what you think you're going to get out of it, how important, like how much of a prerequisite is it in your particular field. I ended up deciding to go to business school more for sort of personal development and network building reasons than I would say a career pivot or building a skill set. But you can get all of those things out of business school. But in my experience, it's just been a really great way to meet people who have done incredibly different careers than I have. And I had very little perspective on how much was out there in sort of my narrow track. So for me, that's been valuable. But again, it's something that sort of comes up as you move through your career, and you can evaluate if it's the right move or not.
I don't have much to add. I think Andrew and Annaliesa have covered most of it. I guess I'm the only one that did not go to graduate school. So from that perspective, I think, look, having a graduate degree is obviously phenomenal. You learn a lot. I think the words networking were mentioned, career pivot were mentioned, all things that I think are very important parts of having that next step in your education. For me, it was more that I found a career where, I could continue to progress, and I didn't necessarily need to pursue an MBA in order to do that. And I feel very fortunate that my career allowed me to do that. I have a number of colleagues and close friends, from UVA and otherwise, who did end up going back to graduate school. And I think you sort of have to take it relative to where you are in your career, what you want to do, and go from there.
Thank you, BJ. What are there any skills like outside of the econ major that you would advise students to pick up? I know, for example, Andrew mentioned sales skills being very important. Is there anything you see like recent grads missing? Just like, gee, I wish they had this.
Well, maybe I'll just start. Andrew said something at the beginning that I thought was really interesting. He said that he was an introvert, and that as a result, he wanted to pursue something in sales in order to strengthen his skill set. My entry into finance was actually the opposite of that, which was I was interviewing originally to be a salesperson, and as part of my sell day, so I had already received an offer from a firm. They brought me up to New York to meet a number of different parts of the firm, and one of the parts of the firm they had me sit with was equity research. And I met with a very senior equity research analyst who said, to me, "You seem like somebody that is very natural with people, but my guess is you don't have a very good understanding of corporate finance, right?" And if I thought about my own skill set, he was right. I didn't have that hardcore understanding. He said, he sort of walked me through what it was that he felt equity research would add to my skill set. And when I left that day and I thought about my skill set and I thought about what I wanted to accomplish longer term in order to be the most well-rounded version of myself in this business, he was 100% right. And so, Andrew's and my stories are quite similar in that way, which is, I think it's very important to be able to understand your strengths and the areas where you have an opportunity to get better. I also think that the more you can address that early on in your career, the more helpful it will be for you later on.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Want to go, Annaliesa? We can go in reverse alphabetical this time.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Sure. I guess I would sort of reiterate that I wouldn't view undergrad as the time to sort of try to amass a great list of skills to sort of, at least that's not the way I viewed it. I think it is really important to have that self-reflection and spend a lot of time thinking about what you're really good at, what you hate doing and need to force yourself to do to get better at, and really just how you enjoy spending your time and what drives you and inspires you, and find the career that's sort of going to speak to those things. And the skills will come. You have to learn how to ask the right questions and ask for help and use resources. But I guess I wouldn't tell people to sort of, learn financial modeling, learn XYZ when you're an undergrad. Like, you can definitely do those things, but ultimately I think it's sort of reflection and taking the time to learn enough about a lot of careers so that you find yourself in a track that fits. That's probably more important than just like nailing the skills before you start.
Great advice. Andrew?
I completely agree with that, and everything Annaliesa said. I mentioned the sales thing. That one's, I think, universal. Communication and presenting, which is related to sales, it just sets people apart. Like someone that can come in and just command a room or just really impress people, whether it's 1-on-1 or 1-on-5 or 1-on-100. And that's another one of those things. You can't get good at it from a book. You just got to get out there and feel nervous and screw up and fall on your face. And so I'd say that's another big one that, and you got to be deliberate about it and seek out opportunities to do it. So I would say that. And there was a quote from Emerson that I've always liked, which was, "What we fear doing most is what we most likely need to do." So it's related to Annaliesa's point around listening to yourself, but I found it similar to what she's saying, like just find your energy, or just pay attention to what's exciting you and what's scaring you. And you have to sit quiet. I'm a huge fan of meditation. I do it every day, and been practicing it for years, but to just sit in quiet and just really listen to what's driving you towards something and away from something. And just because it's driving you away from something doesn't mean you shouldn't face it. Just be aware of it. I just couldn't agree more with that, what Annaliesa was saying in terms of just like, see what's calling you and just pay attention to it, and the rest of the skills will show up as you go along.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm going to have to borrow that Emerson quote next time a student asks about something related to that in office hours. That's great quote. So speaking of students, let's have student questions now. Our panel's been so generous to give us their time, and I'm sure you're dying to ask them questions. So if you use the Zoom raise your hand feature, I'll call on people I see raising their hand on Zoom. Sarah?
Hi, yeah. Annaliesa, I had a quick question. So I saw that you had worked with the Legal Aid Justice Center during your undergrad, and I was just wondering how that impacted your career choices or just your interest in overall.
Yeah, so I did that through Madison House, I think for my 4 years at school. Really loved the experience. They're an incredibly great team in Charlottesville and do a lot of important work. I would say that came from sort of an early career interest. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer when I went to Virginia, and that was part of the reason I wanted to study history. I spent a lot of time just like reading and distilling lots of information into arguments, and that I found really exciting as like an intellectual exercise. That's kind of why I wanted to be a lawyer. And that volunteer work was a great way to see lawyers in action and sort of see what the job is like a little bit. I was doing very clerical work for them and sort of doing grant applications and a lot of sort of office work, but it was a nice way to meet people in the field and have conversations about it. So I would really recommend that. Like, not internships aren't the only way to get exposure to different fields. Like, volunteer work can be a really good way to do that too, and depending on the career path. And it exposed me to sort of what a sort of public sector legal side career path would be. And then when I did internships, I worked with a corporate law firm in Boston, and that was sort of a very different view of what a legal degree could kind of get you doing. Ultimately, there were a lot of reasons why I pivoted away from the legal route, but it was an awesome experience in terms of a way to get involved in Charlottesville and sort of answer some career questions along the way.
Okay, great. Next question. Do we have another question? I'll go ahead and ask one while we're waiting. So use the Zoom raise your hand feature if you have a question. How has COVID affected your businesses and the way you work? And you hearing anything about perhaps your company, this being a permanent work from home type or a hybrid model?
You want me to start again?
Yeah, sure, Andrew.
So big impacts in a lot of different ways. Certainly the technology fluency with things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams and things like that has been great. And sort of, especially with a lot of the jobs which where you're just moving around information, it's changed a lot of the way we're looking and thinking about hiring folks. And do you need to be in the office, or can you hire someone, the best talent, if they're in Vancouver, even though our office is in Maine? And there's definitely a lot of ongoing discussion with that, those types of things. The other big one was when the pandemic hit, it brought so much clarity to our business in terms of like, what do we actually need to do? Like the whole, which is great testament to the leadership and the kind of trust we'd all. But we moved so many things so fast and well. And as I said, we had a great year. And part of that was, I think, good planning. Part of it was just being a sort of COVID advantage business model, because we're predominantly online sales. We sell a lot of stuff that people like to do at home, whether it be kayaking or slippers or robes or snowshoes, in the winter, that kind of thing. But the speed and agility has just been great. And that's one of the things we talk about, is like, how do we embed that into the organization going forward? And there was a really funny, actually when we were chatting with one of our investment banks a few months back, one of their clients, they're telling us a story. They had this plan pre-COVID to it was a retailer with a bunch of stores to do a order up, buy online, pick up curbside service. And they had this 18-month rollout plan, and then COVID hit and they did it in like 18 days. Oh, wow. Just because like, you got to do it. And it was just a great case study, this whole, and I mean, obviously so much terrible things happen, but it was an amazing case study, and to show like what you can do when you have to do it. And even moving a big multi-billion-dollar organization, you can pivot on a dime. And I heard someone else say that in COVID, there are no fixed expenses, which is because in business, we always talk about fixed and variable, and the variable ones go up and down with sales, but like everything just got thrown out the door, and everything got very nimble very quickly. So that was just great eye-opening.
I would say in my job, sort of the day-to-day of the work has obviously changed, everyone being remote. Travel was a really big piece of how my job got done before. Just you would spend a lot of time visiting founders and CEOs of various companies all across the country or the world and meeting with them, trying to see if a partnership could make sense. And now all of that is happening over Zoom, and it's just the flow of building relationships has changed, and the kind of timing of discussions and how those all happen, that has changed. And in private equity, early on and still now, there's just a lot of thought given to how your portfolio is reacting to COVID. So all the companies that we have investments in, some of them, COVID really helps them. Like my company is an investor in this app called All Trails. I don't know if you guys have it or have seen it. It's a hiking app. So it's like subscribers are through the roof this summer because everyone wants to go hiking. But on the other hand, there's a company that is a sort of online vendor platform for wedding vendors. It's like, well, they're not doing so well because there are no weddings happening. So there's sort of reactions that you have to have as an investor and a board member to help these companies either take advantage of huge new opportunities or sort of react to big challenges that are coming from COVID. And now everyone's trying to figure out when those are going to, ramp down or what are here to stay. Obviously, a ton of unanswered questions there, but it's an exciting time to see it all changing.
So the work from home transition was a pretty major shift for the business that I work in. For our industry, the majority of people had probably never worked from home for more than a day or two until March of last year. So it has been quite a big shift. And I think there have been some real positives, and I could name, a lot of them, but I think, there was a feeling of necessity, given how busy it was last year, to be able to have more hours in the day to work. And if you think about what work from home does for you, it takes, for most people, especially if you live in and around a major city like New York or Chicago or San Francisco, it takes away probably a couple of hours of commuting a day. And in a year like last year, where in the finance business, it was extremely busy, especially at different parts of the year, we were able to take that time and we were able to use it to help, help each other, help our clients, and make quite good use of the time. I think it's challenging to build cultures in a virtual environment, right? And if you work with big teams, if you work with varying levels of seniority, I think there is a real challenge to being able to do that on an ongoing basis. It would make sense to me to sort of see a path forward that meets in the middle somewhere, where there is more flexibility, and where people can work from home, especially given that people now have the right technology and the right setups, which is a pretty critical part of this. So if you were around, 18 months ago, people didn't have the setup that they do today. And they wouldn't have been able to have, to be as productive at home as they are now. So I do think that the office environment in some way, shape, or form is going to continue to be a part of a lot of the larger corporations probably, but to be able to have the flexibility, not just in terms of work from home, but also, I think, as Andrew mentioned, geographically, is definitely an opportunity that most people haven't had before. And if you take finance as an example, typically people that wanted to pursue a career in banking came to New York, or they came to San Francisco, or they went to Chicago. And potentially, this environment opens up the opportunity for people to live and work in other places, which I think, going back to a point I made at the beginning, it adds, it helps enrich, I think, the business to be able to bring those different, different types of perspectives into the business.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear, especially how, Annaliesa, for example, some of the companies are really benefiting and some are really hurt from COVID in terms of industries. So student questions, of course, this is the student Q&A portion. So use the Zoom raise your hand feature. Riley?
I think Mr. Vargas spoke about he chose his first job to become like a well-rounded employee in his field. What other traits would you say, like in each of your respective fields, would make someone a well-rounded like employee?
So I would say in my experience, this sort of first job you're going to have either in consulting or investing is going to be a very analytically oriented job. You're doing a lot of the data analysis, a lot of the financial modeling, and your job is to really like know the numbers and the details inside and out. But I think what makes someone really well-rounded at that stage in their career is the ability to sort of zoom out a little bit and think about what your analysis means for the big picture of the project you're working on, like having the ability to know the details, but also think critically about the implications, and not just see yourself as sort of, the sort of robot computer modeler, just getting out the answers, and really have a perspective on what it means, and being willing to share that perspective, sort of working on those communication skills, and balancing sort of the micro with the macro. I think that's a really nice skill to work on in your first job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A bit more the communication again. The other thing is like try to really understand the business you're in. And that sounds simple, but to just like you should be able to sketch it out. I'm not gonna throw another quote out, but I think it was an Einstein one, right? If you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it well enough yourself. Like you got to get to that level of proficiency that you could explain what your business does and why it adds value to a 5-year-old. And that sounds simple, but it's not. And you have to really, I think, spend a lot of time to get it down to that crisp, to understand that crisply in your mind. And then related to that, try and understand why, to be well-rounded, understand why the people above you, like your boss or your boss's boss or the CEO or whatever, what do they care about? What are they focusing on and why? And that'll serve you in 2 ways. One, it'll make you smarter because you'll get a broader perspective, to Annaliesa's point. And 2, it'll stop you from going down this massive analytical exercise only to realize you were going, you had your ladder on the wrong building because you didn't realize what the ultimate goal was. So that it's related to the stepping back and understanding the broader perspective, but make sure you understand the purpose, the person you're doing the work for, why they're asking it, and ultimately like how it's going to fit into that broader model of the whole business, if that makes sense.
All right, student questions, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom. Oliver.
Hi, so I was, kind of curious. I'm a 4th-year econ major, and recruiting's changed a lot in terms of COVID. How do you guys think it's affected your, respective firms, and going forward, how do you think students should respond?
I can start. I think for a lot of the larger firms, recruiting had actually started to undergo a pretty significant change, call it 3, 4, 5 years ago. And Jen is familiar with this, where a lot of our initial screenings, which would have been done in person to start with, transitioned to be video and virtual. And, you all probably have had some experience with that as well. And so the good news is that the recruiting process, I think, was somewhat prepared for the move to COVID. And I don't think there has been a lot of change as a result. I think it was hard this summer. So we actually did end up having an intern program this summer. I know a number of other firms, in investment banking did not. We did have an intern program. I'm really glad that we were able to save it. It was virtual, which was a little bit difficult because, it's very hard to get to know people and to train them and to see how they're doing when you're just doing it over Zoom. But the reality is that some, interaction and some opportunity is better than none. And my hope is that this summer, even if we have another virtual type of situation, that we would have the opportunity to at least spend some time in person with people. And what you learn about virtual is actually, in my experience at least, okay one-on-one, right? So if you hop on a Zoom with someone and it's just you and that other person, you can accomplish a lot of what you might have been able to accomplish, sitting down in a room with them. It's quite hard when you start to multiply that by 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20. And so, I do think that it is going to be important to be able to weave in some sort of in-person aspect, both to recruiting, to internships, and then, hopefully to be able to offer to our incoming, analysts as we go through the next year or two.
I would say I have a lot of friends who are in the job market right now, since I was supposed to graduate from business school this spring, but I've pushed it off. So a lot of my friends are going through exactly what you are, and trying to find a job. It does feel like, at least in investing in finance, hiring hasn't stopped or slowed down, but the approach firms are taking is maybe a little bit more measured than in the past, particularly for the entry level role in private equity. It has gotten to this kind of crazy point where firms are recruiting 18 months or more in advance from investment banking classes, who are hiring 18 months in advance from college, and it's all sort of backing up really early. That's tough. It puts a lot of pressure on people to jump into these interviews and commit to roles that I don't think they are necessarily ready to do that. But I think COVID has shaken that up a little bit. And firms are maybe willing to wait for the right candidate, go off cycle a little bit, and hire people outside of that kind of traditional funnel, which I think is great news for coming out of undergrad. You can, I think, take a little bit more time, try to get to know firms more personally, but the sort of flip side of that, it means you might need to do a little bit more legwork to not just get in line for the traditional path, and do more outreach and try to build those relationships in order to get to those recruiting channels. So in some ways it's good, in some ways it takes a little bit more work. But in the end, if you end up somewhere that's a better fit, I think it's perfect.
I'd agree with everything that EJ and Annaliesa have said. I'd also add that and I'm not an HR. I don't. We do hire quite a few people, but I'm familiar with the processes. But the remote, virtual kind of world, I don't mean to say this scary, but it kind of further commoditizes potential candidates, because you're often you're initially distilled down to your resume, which is a one piece of paper, which is so unfortunate. That it captures 1% of what you are. So, but when you're in a sea of hundreds that get first filtered by someone in HR, and then usually by a junior person in the department you're interested in, and then ultimately gets to someone that's got decisional authority, but that's after it's been whittled down. So it's a bad numbers game. So what do you do about that? And it's what Annaliesa was saying. You got to do some more legwork. And if you really are passionate about a company or two, just talk to anybody you can who works there, or they know someone that works there. And it's the old networking thing, but it's a lot of legwork, and it's going to be some rejection, and some people aren't going to be nice to you, and some people are going to be super nice to you, and just keep talking to them, because if someone like me, and I'm faced with a whole bunch of resumes, and then I've got someone that I don't know, one of my peers in supply chain said, hey, you should talk to this kid, he's great, and he's got a blah blah blah, whatever the history is, or you should talk to. It's just going to put you way, you're going to cut out several layers of that numbers game, which you want to do. So that'd be my piece of advice on that front. And it is more work, but it matters in my experience.
Great answers. So student questions, please raise your hand in the Brian.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming today. I have a quick question about interviewing. Do you guys have any tips for econ majors as we try to interview for finance roles?
I can start. So over the last 22 years, I've interviewed a lot of people. And there is one consistent theme, in the ones that do well and the ones that don't do as well, and it's preparation. And it always surprises me how few people take the time to really prepare for what it is like to sit either, virtually or in person with someone and be asked questions and prepare an answer to those questions. And there's a great book called Talk Like TED, and basically it's written by a motivational speaker. And what he does is he goes through and he analyzes the 10 most viewed TED Talks of all time. And the commonality among them all, although they're all different topics, different presenters, is that I think the average number of rehearsals, if you will, that were done for each TED Talk was over 200. Right? So if you think about the actual time of a TED Talk relative to the amount of time put in, that's a lot. I had the opportunity to, about 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to sit on a panel in front of a very large audience and interview a pretty well-known CEO. And I would come home every night for several weeks, and I would take the chairs in the apartment and I would put the chairs exactly like they were going to be on stage. And I would give my wife the piece of paper with the answers to the questions. And every night after dinner, I would make her sit with me and I would make her prepare. And 2 weeks later, lo and behold, while I still had a little bit of of nervousness heading up on stage, I was certainly much better prepared than I would have otherwise been. And you're not going to have all the answers to the questions, and that's okay, right? People don't expect you to. I think a lot of the interview process is to see how you react to answering those questions. And I do believe that the more you can prepare and put yourself in the situation, the more successful that you're going to be.
I couldn't agree more with what BJ was saying. And the other thing I'd add is similar to what I was talking about with like presenting. You just got to do it. Just go practice it. I mean, you can prepare. You need to prepare. You need to be like, well, you need to know your answers and be honest with yourself about what you are and what you know, what you're after. And just go, even, and this is, I don't know, maybe this is not the right thing to say here, but even go apply for some companies you're not really that interested in, just so you can get the interview practice down. Because even if you're super prepared, if you're not used to like being in the hot seat there, you can just flub it. And the only way I found to get better at it is just experience. So just go do it, whatever, just get as many as you can.
You had a great practice with your friends. And I'd also say, not only are you trying to prepare answers about yourself, which a lot of interview questions can be about you, but really prepare to learn as much as you can about the role and why you're interested in it, and what the company does and what that group does. And I think sometimes in my limited interview experience, I've been surprised with how little people have thought about kind of why they want to work there, and what has brought them there. And they're so focused on just kind of nailing the classic interview questions that maybe haven't zoomed out and given that enough thought. So focus on that part too.
Okay, great. Student questions, please raise your hand in the Zoom. Michael.
Yeah, I guess this question is more for BJ, although it could apply to anybody really. But given that you've been working in this industry for so long, I'm wondering kind of how have you seen the industry change over time with the introduction of like new technologies and more data and stuff like that, and kind of how have you adjusted?
It's a great question. I guess as Annaliesa and Andrew probably have plenty they could add, because technology is such a universal issue right now. And I think look, companies have been evolving since the start of companies, right? And technology, whether it was 100 years ago or today, is been the driver behind that. I think what's changed is the need to implement technology across what we do in our business. I'm sure Andrew is feeling this in his business as well. The bar is higher than it has ever been, and a lot of what we spend our time on, which I think is very relevant for those of you who are thinking about coming into investment banking as a career, is how do we use technology to make roles, whether it's an analyst role all the way up to an MD role, more efficient, so that you're spending less time on things that we would consider to be busy but necessary work, and more time on higher margin, higher value add work. And it really comes down to two things. One is you have to come up with the technology, right? Which is easier said than done because it doesn't exist. If it existed, we would all be using it right now. So part of it is an exercise in figuring out what is the technology that will make the workforce more efficient. And then the second is the actual uptake. And for better or for worse, the uptake of technology, generally speaking, is always slower than you want it to be. And I think part of that is just a natural human reaction. But you sort of need to do number one, then you need to do number two. And then, typically once you've gotten through those two, you start to feel the effects, which usually are good for everyone.
Okay, that was actually the final question. We just don't want to run over time. Thank you again to all of our alums so much for attending today's program.